It is time for a moment of personal reflection. Merle Haggard died this week. Merle Haggard, of course, one of the most successful performers, writers, and musicians in the history of country music. Merle Haggard was 79 years old, and Merle Haggard had a big influence on my own life. And here's how. When I was 14 and I was on the rock and roll and jazz track big time, I saw Merle Haggard perform on the Smothers Brothers TV show. Now, I had never seen real country music before until Merle Haggard came on the Smothers Brothers show. And by the way, followed the next week by George Jones, who is another, of course, historic figure in country music, incredible singer. So I saw Merle Haggard, and what 14-year-old me saw in Merle Haggard was a level of intensity and charisma and power that I had not seen for some time in rock music. Rock music had changed my life. I saw the Beatles when I was, on my 13th birthday, actually, at Shea Stadium. I saw Bob Dylan perform later, but of course was very influenced by Dylan, as everybody was. I saw Jimi Hendrix. I saw a lot of people. I was lucky to grow up in a great time for music. But rock music was already becoming, in my mind, I never put words to it, but it was becoming what Kurt Cobain and others eventually came to call corporate rock. Led Zeppelin, they were great musicians, but there was a kind of aura of bombast about it. The Rolling Stones were already turning into something of a commercial act. I don't know, things were changing. It wasn't speaking to me the way it used to. Jazz music was not connecting the way it used to. And then along came country western music. Along came, in my life, Merle Haggard on the Smothers Brothers show, singing what at the time was his best-known hit, Mama Tried. And I started learning country music, which was ridiculous, given my ethnic background, the fact that I lived in New York State, and so on. But if it weren't for Merle Haggard, I wouldn't have learned country music. If it weren't for country music, I wouldn't have become a weekend country singer, which was the only genre of music where I made decent money ever in my life. In fact, let's see, let me do the math. At 17, I sang country music at the Republican State Convention in New York, where the flagship singer was Spiro Agnew. Now, if you think I had to be really great in order to play the Republican convention, bear in mind that there weren't a lot of country singers living in New York State in 1970. But there was a huge market for it in the mountains, in the Adirondacks, also in parts of New Jersey, and later on when I moved to the Washington, D.C. area, between biker bars and bike conventions like the Maryland Mile Convention and places in Virginia, West Virginia, that country music background served me personally really well. But there was never anybody in my lifetime, certainly there was Hank Williams, there was never anybody in my lifetime who had the genius and the power and the singing ability of Merle Haggard. Now, Lefty Frizzell was a great of a previous era, even though he was still alive then. Hank Williams, of course, was a world changer, but he had come and gone by that time. Hank Williams died on for New Year's Eve, 1953. 9 months later, I was born, which led me to hope against hope that perhaps I was the reincarnation of Hank Williams. Then I started writing songs and realized I was not the reincarnation of Hank Williams. So that one didn't work out for me. But Merle, again, he didn't just change me, he changed a lot of folks. Now he became stereotyped, unfortunately, because he wrote a song called Okie from Muskogee, which he insisted later was written as a goof or a joke. But it was a right-wing anthem that Merle Haggard wrote. I don't know the timing. I probably should have looked up early 70s, I would guess. And that made him extremely famous, far more famous, but it also stereotyped him as a right-wing type, which he never was. He was more complicated than that. He wanted to follow up Okie from Muskogee, his hugest hit. You may remember it. We don't smoke marijuana in Muskogee. We don't take our trips on LSD. It also included one of the most bizarre lines ever in any song was, leather boots are still in style for manly footgear. Not the most elegantly written line in Merle Haggard's repertoire, but there you have it. He wanted to follow it up with a song about an interracial romance called Irma Jackson. His record company overruled him and followed it up with another right-wing anthem called The Fightin' Side of Me. If you're running down this country, man, you're walking on the fighting side of me, which included the line, they love our, speaking of hippie protesters like myself, they love our milk and honey, but they preach about some other way of living. I ignored a lot of right-wing jibes, but I got to admit, that was a punch that landed. But he, as I say, he was never a simple right-winger. He was never a bigot. He was never, he was always a populist. He was called the poet of the common man in the gender-loaded terminology of the time. He was a big advocate for working people. Yes, he pushed a few right-wing tropes, but what he was basically was a person who stood up for regular, ordinary working people. I like to think that over a few beers or a cup of coffee or something with the right people, Merle Haggard could have come to become a hero of the left. In fact, he did. This will have to do, but toward the end of his life, he did think that it was time for a woman president, and he did come around to the Hillary Clinton camp. So he was moving in the right direction. Merle Haggard, great legend of country music, dead at 79. Merle, we'll miss you.